The year is 1977. Ruth Morgan hasn't heard from her husband in days. She's frantic, she's scared, she's waiting for the phone to ring for some kind of answer, some kind of sign, and when it does, it's not the police. It's a woman that she doesn't recognize, one who won't give her her name, and this stranger tells her, "Don't worry, Charles, Ruth's husband, is okay. Everything is going to be okay." Then she tells Ruth to open her Bible to Ecclesiastes 12, verses 1 through 8, and hangs up. The line goes silent and she's gone. 2 days later, Ruth gets another call, except this time it is the police. Her husband's body has been found in the Arizona desert with a gunshot wound to the back of his head. And that Bible verse that mysterious woman told her to read, well, it was written on a note found pinned to her dead husband's body. So, who was this woman? Welcome to the Mind of Minnie. I'm Jasmine, and today we are going to be talking about the life and untimely death of Charles Morgan. To get some kind of understanding on what happened, we do have to get to know the man himself. So, Charles Morgan, Chuck, to the people who knew him very well, was a seemingly ordinary man. He was 39 years old, lived in Tucson, Arizona. He was a husband, a father of 4 daughters, and the head escrow agent at Statewide Escrow. He was the kind of man that would go to church every Sunday. You can say hello to him. He'd greet you with a huge smile. And everyone really did seem to love him and really spoke highly of him, which is why his disappearance on March 22nd, 1977, was so alarming. It was a regular morning in the Morgan household. Chuck took his girls to school and headed to work. Except Chuck never made it to work that day. It was as if he vanished into thin air. But 3 days after his disappearance, Ruth hears this loud commotion at her front door early in the morning. She gets up to investigate what the hell is going on and see what that noise is possibly coming from, and it is Chuck. He's standing there with plastic zip ties around his wrists, one around his ankle. He's missing a shoe, and when Ruth tries to talk to him, he won't speak. He can't speak. He just stands there, wide eyed, terrified, pointing at his throat. Ruth, thinking quick on her feet, she goes and grabs a pen and paper and hands it to him. And what Chuck wrote down sent chills down Ruth's spine. He had been kidnapped, drugged, and whatever they put in his throat was a hallucinogenic poison, and he wrote that if he spoke even one word, it would either kill him or drive him permanently insane. And then he wrote something that terrified Ruth even more. He said, "Don't call the police." He said, "Don't call a doctor. And if you do, you're going to put our family in danger." So Ruth doesn't call anyone. She didn't call 911. She didn't call her doctor. She didn't even call her own family to tell them what the hell is going on. She just sat there in the middle of the night with her husband, who couldn't speak, covered in zip tie marks, missing a shoe, and telling her through a notepad that their lives are dependent on her staying silent. Can you imagine being Ruth in that moment? Your 4 daughters are asleep down the hall. Your husband is sitting in front of you looking like he's seen Casper the unfriendly ghost, and all you can do is read what he's writing to you and try not to completely freak out because you can't even call the cops. Chuck was also hinting at other things in the notes that he was writing to Ruth that night. He told Ruth that he'd been working undercover with the United States Treasury Department and that he'd been involved in something for years and couldn't tell her about it. And he thought that he had things under control. Clearly, he did not. Of course, Ruth wanted answers. She wanted to know what the hell was going on to get a better understanding on why her husband was kidnapped and drugged for a few days, but Chuck wouldn't give her any details. He said the less she knew, the safer she would be. So she knew enough, obviously, to be terrified, but not enough to actually help her, and she couldn't call for help even if she wanted to. So this man, this escrow agent, is suddenly telling her that he's been holding this life-threatening secret for years. Personally, I would have lost my mind, but Ruth stayed silent, she stayed calm, and it's because Chuck told her she had to. In the days and weeks following Chuck's kidnapping, Ruth watches her husband transform into someone she barely recognizes. He starts carrying a gun, he buys another one, he buys a bulletproof vest that he starts wearing every single day, every time he goes out, not even just at night, not even just in certain neighborhoods, every single day he's wearing a bulletproof vest. This man is going to work in an escrow office wearing a bulletproof vest. He also modified his car with a secret switch hidden on the fender so that it would unlock from the outside. Now, when I read that, I had so many questions because what on earth and what predicament could you get yourself into where you would need that special switch on your car. I still don't understand it. And in addition to that, he started wearing a knife in his belt buckle. So he had a concealed knife in his belt buckle at all times. So Chuck Morgan was preparing for something. And Ruth is watching this all unfold in her home. She's trying to hold it together because she can't tell anyone anything. She's trying to be normal for her daughters who need their mom. And she's watching her husband get more and more protection, and she doesn't know what the hell is going on. She does push for more answers, and Chuck does give her a little bit more each time, but it's never enough to paint the full picture. But then a subpoena arrives. Chuck has been called to testify in a secret investigation into illegal financial activity along the Arizona Mexico border. And despite everything that he's been through, everything that has happened to him, the kidnapping, the zip ties, the terror that he's living in every day, Chuck shows up to testify. He sat down and he talked. But shortly after his testimony, Chuck Morgan vanishes for the second time. The day is June 11th, 1977. Chuck leaves his house for work like he normally does. He's carrying his guns, he's wearing his vest. So when he doesn't come home at first, Ruth is concerned, but she's been worried for a while now because his behavior has been really strange. So she isn't completely freaking out. But then days start to pass, and there's no word and there's no sighting of Chuck. And that's when Ruth's phone rings. She's hoping that it's the police and maybe that Chuck is calling her, telling her he was kidnapped again and he's on his way and he's okay and he's coming home. But it's neither of those. It's a woman who Ruth has never heard of before, one that she's never spoken to in her entire life. And when Ruth asks her name, instead of answering, this woman says that Chuck is okay, that everything is going to be okay. Just like that. No explanation, no context, no answer to the question that Ruth actually asked. And then the stranger tells Ruth to open her Bible to Ecclesiastes 12, verses 1 through 8. And then she hangs up. Ruth is left standing there holding the phone like, what just happened? Who was this woman? How does she know Chuck? How does she know Ruth's number? And if Chuck is okay, why isn't he the one making this phone call right now? Something is very wrong, and Ruth knows deep down that her husband is not okay. Then, on June 22nd, 1977, 11 days after Chuck walked out of his front door, his body is found. 40 miles west of Tucson, lying next to his Mercury Cougar on a remote desert road. He'd been shot in the back of his head with his own .357 Magnum, and his body was lying next to the gun. But that's not where things get weird. Chuck was found wearing his bulletproof vest, the same one he wears every single day. He had his holster on, he had the belt buckle that had the knife inside of it, which is still concealed inside. So he was prepared for something when he was found. But inside the car, investigators did find a cache of weapons, ammunition, CB radios, and a pair of sunglasses. So these sunglasses actually didn't belong to Chuck. Who they belong to, we don't know. And whether they're left there on accident or purpose, we don't know that either. And the sunglasses were just the tip of this insanely large iceberg. Because one of Chuck's teeth was wrapped carefully in a white handkerchief and it was just sitting on the seat of his car. Yeah, one of his teeth. Someone took out one of his teeth and wrapped it neatly and put it in his car. I thought that was insane too. So I researched to see if there was any tools or evidence of anything that could have pulled his tooth out at the crime scene. And from what I've read, there is nothing that was found. There was nothing confirmed to be found that could have done that. But here's what I did find. So the autopsy revealed bruises on Chuck's body and missing fingernails. Investigators also found a piece of paper with handwritten directions to the exact location where Chuck's body was found, but it was written in Chuck's own handwriting. So essentially, Chuck wrote directions to the place where he would go and ultimately die. And as if things couldn't get even more confusing, there was a $2 bill pinned to Chuck's underwear. On the back was a hand-drawn map of the area between Tucson and the Mexican border, and on the front, there's 7 Spanish names written out beginning with the letter A through G, and then above them was Ecclesiastes 12, verses 1 through 8. Now, that Bible verse might sound pretty familiar to you because it was the same one that the mysterious woman recited to Ruth on the phone when she told her that Chuck was going to be okay. And now that same Bible verse is on his dead body. But what does Ecclesiastes 12, verses 1 through 8 actually say? It says, "Remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the days of trouble come and the years approach, when you will say, I find no pleasure in them. Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars grow dark, and the clouds return after the rain, when the keeper of the house tremble and the strong men stoop, when the grinders cease because they are few and those looking through the windows grow dim, when the doors on the streets are closed and the sound of grinding fades, when the people rise at the sound of birds but their song grows faint, when people are afraid of heights and of the dangers in the streets, when the almond trees blossom and the grasshopper drags itself along and desire is no longer stirred. Then the people go to their eternal homes and the mourners go about the streets. Remember him. Before the silver cord is severed and the golden bowl is broken, before the pitcher is shattered at the spring and the wheel broken at the well, and the dust returns to the ground it came from, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher. Everything is meaningless. That passage is about death and returning back to dust. So someone pinned that to a dead man's underwear. And the crime scene was cleaned. Someone wiped the crime scene clean. They've destroyed all potential evidence that could have helped investigators get a little bit more of a grasp on what the hell went down in the desert that day. Whoever was with Chuck, and we know someone was with Chuck because the sunglasses were there, and who else would just pull out a tooth and wrap it neatly in a handkerchief and wipe the gun clean? It was a very calculated move. It was a very calculated and staged crime scene to find. And 2 days after Chuck's body was discovered, the mystery woman called again. This time, she doesn't call Ruth, she calls the Pima County Sheriff's Department. And she gave herself a name, Green Eyes. She told investigators that she'd known Chuck, that she'd met him at a motel the days before he was found dead, and that Chuck had shown her something, a briefcase. It was full of cash, and he told her that there was a $90,000 contract put on his life, escalating at $5,000 every single day. And the briefcase full of cash, well, Chuck was planning to use it to buy his way off and out of the hitman's radar. He thought that he could buy his way out of his own death. Now, police didn't just take Green Eyes at her word, they checked. And the CCTV footage confirmed that Green Eyes and Chuck had actually met at the motel. She was telling the truth. So this woman, this stranger who calls herself nothing but an eye color, had information about Chuck that no one else could have possibly have known. She knew about the briefcase, she knew about the contract, she knew about the Bible verse, and then something even crazier happens. After Green Eyes calls, a man calls too. And he says that he's Green Eyes' husband. He told investigators that Chuck and his associates had been involved in buying gold bars and gold coins in Mexico, and then he just hangs up, just like his wife did. He was gone. So Green Eyes wasn't alone. She also had a husband who knew things and who also chose to come forward and then disappear. Now, I have so many questions when it comes to Green Eyes because was she told not to come forward? Was she protecting someone? Was she involved with whatever got Chuck killed? Or was she someone who genuinely did care about Chuck and wanted to try to help get answers for whatever happened to him? Because here's the thing that I keep coming back to is that she called Ruth to comfort her before the body was found. No one knew anything really was going on with Chuck or what the hell happened to him, so she didn't need to do that. She picked up the phone, called this woman to tell her that everything was going to be okay, even though he wasn't okay. We don't know if she knew that Chuck was dead at the time of the phone call, or she could have genuinely thought that Chuck was alive and he was well and she was just giving her the heads up. Either way, she knew something, but I don't see why she would contact his wife if she knew that he was dead. Unless she's just like this evil person. But was she trying to protect herself? Was she trying to protect Ruth? We don't really know. And to this day, no one knows who Green Eyes was. No one has ever been able to identify her. No one is able to identify her husband as well. They made their calls, They told investigators enough to be credible, they were proven to be correct, and they vanished into the night. So, after collecting all of this evidence and analyzing the crime scene, Pima County Sheriff's Department ruled Chuck Morgan's death a suicide. The case was officially closed August 10th, 1977, and the Sheriff's Department released a statement saying, "We found no evidence that anyone else took part in the death but himself." When I found that out, my jaw was literally on the floor because I walked you through the evidence, right? And somebody took everything that we have discussed so far and said to themselves, yes, he did it to himself. And the thing that makes it really make absolutely no sense because Chuck was shot in the back of his head with his own 357 Magnum, right? The fingerprints were wiped clean from the gun from the crime scene. There was no fingerprints anywhere, and here's the thing that really never sat right with some investigators and his family. There was gunshot residue found on Chuck's left hand. Chuck Morgan was right-handed. So we're supposed to believe that a man took his non dominant hand, reached behind his head, and shot himself. And somehow left zero fingerprints, zero evidence that he did this in the process. I'm sorry. What? Ruth completely rejected this idea. His entire family rejected this idea, including his daughters, because what the hell? Seriously? In the days after Chuck's death, before Ruth was even able to process what the hell happened, someone started searching. Chuck's car that was in police custody because of the death investigation, it was broken into. Someone broke into police evidence to break into his car. And around the same time, his office was also ransacked. And 3 weeks after his body was found, two men show up to Ruth's front door. It was late at night. They flash their badges really quick, say they're with the FBI and they need to look for something. They walk into her house, they tear it apart, they go through every room, every drawer, and Ruth never found out if they found what they were looking for. She honestly didn't even know what they were looking for. They wouldn't tell her. And when investigators later contacted the FBI to figure out who those two agents were, the FBI claimed that they have no knowledge of Chuck Morgan whatsoever. So, whoever came knocking on her door that night and ransacked her entire home weren't FBI agents. And the question arises, who were they? And what were they so desperate to find? So, up until now, we've watched this man be terrorized, kidnapped, and ultimately killed, or according to Pima County, kill himself. But we haven't fully answered the question that's been sitting underneath it all, which is why Chuck? What did an escrow agent from Tucson, Arizona have anything worth killing over? And to understand that, you need to understand escrow work in the 1970s, specifically in Tucson, because it wasn't just paperwork. Tucson sits right on the border of Mexico, and in the 1970s, that border was a highway for dirty money, smuggling routes, underground transactions, dangerous people moving dangerous things. And escrow was a perfect vehicle to clean that money. And here's why. Arizona, at the time, was the only state in the country that allowed blind trust ownership in real estate, which means that someone could buy a property completely anonymously, no name attached, no trail. And the only person who knew was buying that property and the real identity of that buyer was the escrow agent, Chuck Morgan. He saw everything, every buyer, every seller, every dollar that changed hands. So, who exactly was walking through Chuck's store? Who was handing him their transactions to handle? And what did Chuck do with everything that he saw? So Ruth had no answers. The daughters were without a father. And all these questions surrounding his death were plaguing his family. Up until someone started to do some digging. Chuck's case was closed, like I mentioned before, but not everyone was willing to accept that answer and leave it at just that. A journalist by the name of Don Devereaux had been following mob activity in Arizona for years, and Chuck Morgan's case pulled him in completely. Starting in about 1986, Don Devereaux began his own investigation. He wasn't just working from a desk, he was making calls, he was knocking on doors, he was tracking anyone with any connection to Chuck. He talked to Chuck's attorney, Ronald Newman, who confirmed that Chuck had been called to testify in a secret investigation into Tucson Bank, Banco Internacional de Arizona. and its former director, David Colley. The Arizona Attorney General at the time, Bruce Badett, corroborated that story. But Don kept digging, and what he found was far beyond just a secret investigation. Chuck had been on payroll for organized crime, more specifically the Bonanno crime family, which is one of the five original New York mafia families. Between 1973 and his death in 1977, Chuck had been facilitating the movement of over $1 billion worth of gold and platinum, flowing through fraudulent land deals designed to look legitimate. And the money wasn't just coming from the mob. There was connections to Southeast Asia, to Vietnamese government officials, to the Department of Defense, and allegedly to rogue CIA agents pocketing money for themselves. So there was the mob on one side and the United States government on the other, and in the middle was Chuck Morgan. But here's what Don believes got Chuck killed. Chuck kept duplicate records of every illicit transaction, every name, every dollar, every deal. And that's what made his daughter's Megan's words hit so much differently. Because she said, my father had a lot of information about people here in Tucson that would be very detrimental. There's a lot of information about politicians, people who are still alive that work in our government, and he had information and they wanted to silence him. That was his daughter, knowing why her father was killed and living with that for the rest of her life. In February of 1990, Unsolved Mysteries aired a segment on Chuck's case. Don interviewed. His articles about the investigation were also published, and over 600 calls came into the tip hotline. But 3 months later, a man named Doug Johnston was found shot dead in his car outside of his Phoenix office. Now, Doug had nothing to do with Chuck Morgan's case. You might be like, Jazz, what are you talking about? Because Doug was just a graphic designer. He worked on computer graphics across the street from where Don Devereaux's office was. He also drove the almost identical car as Don Devereaux, a Toyota station wagon, and whose workplace address was different from Don's home address by one number. Doug was shot once behind the ear. There's no gun found at the scene. His death was ruled a homicide, and the killer has never been found. Don Devereaux believes that bullet was meant for him, that Doug Johnston, a completely innocent man, died because someone confused his car for Don's. He drove the wrong car, he worked on the wrong street, and it cost him his life. And 6 months after Doug's death, Don receives a call from another journalist who told him that he heard from his CIA source that the bullet that killed Doug was meant for Don, and that there's still a contract hit out on Don's life because of what he knew about Chuck Morgan. But Don kept going anyway. In August of 1991, a writer from Washington, D.C. reached out to Don. His name is Danny Casolaro. Danny had been working on what he believed was the story of a lifetime, and he called it The Octopus. It was a massive hidden network connecting organized crime, government agencies, armed trafficking, and covert political operations. It was a conspiracy that he believed reached all the way to the highest level of American power. And Chuck was just a thread in the web. And Danny had been gathering evidence for months, sources, documents, testimony. And when he reached out to Don, he believed Don had pieces of the puzzle that can help him connect everything together. So they agreed to meet. Danny told Don that he was close, that he had evidence that could blow everything wide open. But they never got the chance to sit down and discuss the evidence together. Because before Danny Casolaro could share what he found, he was discovered dead in his hotel bathtub in Martinsburg, West Virginia. His wrists were slashed and his death was ruled a suicide. His family say this is completely impossible. His brother told investigators that Danny was terrified of blood. He was actually squeamish, so he would never do this to himself. In his research, his files, every single piece of evidence that he spent months compiling about the octopus, it was gone. His notes were never found. And to this day, nobody knows what happened to Danny Casolaro's files. So, let's do a count, shall we? Chuck Morgan, dead, ruled a suicide. Doug Johnston, dead, ruled a homicide, and the killer was never found. And Danny Casolaro, dead, ruled suicide. 3 people connected to the same web of secrets, 3 deaths that no one could cleanly explain, and 3 families left without answers. And Don Devereaux, the man who knows the most about this Charles Morgan case, and probably a lot more than that, has been receiving death threats ever since. Solved means that you found the answers. Closed means that you stopped looking. And someone, somewhere, needed them to stop looking. The question that haunts this entire case is simple. What did Chuck Morgan know that was worth all of this? What was in those duplicate records? And what was the octopus that Danny Casolaro died trying to expose? And who is still out there today, almost 50 years later, making sure that those answers never get out? Because here's the thing about secrets, someone is always keeping them. And in the case of Chuck Morgan, that someone has been keeping them for a very long time. Before I give you my personal thoughts about this case, I would appreciate it if you can hit that like button, subscribe if you're not already subscribed, and leave a comment about what you think about this case. I would love to hear what you have to say. All right, so here's my take on the Chuck Morgan case. I think Chuck Morgan flew too close to the sun. I think he was a smart man. He's a careful man. He wore a bulletproof vest every day. He modified his car with an escape route because he knew the world that he was operating in. But his downfall and the thing that ultimately cost him his life and rippled into other people were probably the duplicate records. Why did he keep them? Protection, was it insurance, maybe all of it. But whatever his reason was, someone found out that he had them, and that was the beginning of the end. That's when the trust with these very powerful people came to an end. Was it the mob? Was it the government? I'm not sure. But here's what I do know, too many things don't add up, right? His death was ruled a suicide, which is clearly not a suicide. The fact that he claimed to be working with the Treasury Department on this secret project, but he didn't receive any protection if he was working on this threatening project. Even after he testified in this court case about against a bank, he wasn't offered any protection. He wasn't given protection after that. It's almost like something slipped up and things got too messy. Maybe they got too public. So legally, they started checking their boxes, right? They got all their boxes checked. He testified in court. The case moves forward. But behind closed doors, Chuck had to go. Someone was like, no, we got to get rid of him. Someone knows exactly what happened in the desert, June of 1970. Someone knows who Green Eyes really was. Someone knows where the duplicate records are and what is in them, if they even exist anymore. And someone also knows what Danny Casolaro died trying to expose. But whatever it is, don't tell me because I'm not trying to be body number 4. Thank you so much. I'm going to pass on that. I will stay curious forever. Don't even email me nothing. Nope. I want no parts of that. But thank you guys so much for watching. I truly appreciate it. If you'd like to support my work, all my link is in the description. All my socials will be in the description as well. And until next time, stay curious and always stay suspicious. See you next week.